Do you read the ICML or NeurIPS proceedings regularly? Or maybe, do you want to start? Data Skeptic is looking for a few listeners who would be interested in participating as panelists for a one-time episode where we review papers from a recent conference. Our first one is going to be the ICML conference coming up in July. Panelists will need to lead a quick discussion about one paper that they pick and be ready to chat about a few others that the group selects. Ideally, panelists have some public speaking skills, maybe conference talks or something on YouTube. If you're interested in participating in our panel, send an email to panelists@dataskeptic.com. Include a brief description of yourself, a resume if you think that's appropriate, and for sure share a few links so we can get to know a few things about you. And please get those applications in by Friday, May 13th. Do you like remote work? I'm pretty happy with it. I get to spend more time with our parrot Yoshi. But not everyone feels that way. What does remote work mean for productivity, for job satisfaction, and for well-being? With a digital paper trail of behavioral details across calendar invites, Slack communication, and other sources, as well as some in-person interviews, today's guest shares insights about these interesting questions related to telework.
My name is Darja Šmite, and I'm a professor of software engineering at Blekinge Institute of Technology, and I also have a partial affiliation with SINTEF in Norway and the Norwegian University of Technology and Science.
What are some of your research interests, broadly speaking?
Broadly speaking, I'm actually the expert in distributed development and outsourcing, and you can only imagine what the pandemic brought to researchers in my field. It's like the best life experiment ever that could have been designed.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you've had this event happen in your career of the pandemic, obviously. What was scholarship on this topic like before that?
Well, it was mostly corporate outsourcing and offshoring. And for me, because the university I work for, we only work with companies. We don't do really this ivory tower type of research or research with students. We work with companies. But my other scholar peers have also worked with distributed project teams in university settings with students. So it was kind of small scale, not to mention that working from home has been very stigmatized. And another example that I can give, probably closest to this, was open source projects. So nothing of this scale and corporate setting has been known from before.
Roughly speaking, what percentage of the workforce, or do you have ways of even measuring how much could be working remote? What was the state of things before the pandemic forced more of us remote?
Oh, I think it depends highly in different countries. So, for example, in US, you can find research saying that knowledge workers occasionally work from home, like 5% maybe. And then there are companies and countries like the Asian countries, their working from home would be unimaginable. And then there are different type of professions where work from home could be a normal thing. For example, startup companies. I can imagine that a lot of startup employees work from home.
Well, then with the work from home orders, sometimes lockdown, depending on what the government said and things like that, companies had to quickly adapt. Were there any general trends? Did we see an overnight tripling, or do you have any just sort of broad observations about the start of the pandemic and its initial impacts?
Yeah, very good question. So what we have found in our research is that companies that used to have offices in different countries were very well prepared for this. So they had all the tools in place. They had equipment and licenses for software to be used to coordinate the work and work from home. They had all the data servers, how to upload their contributions, code contributions, if we talk about software companies. But then there are companies that used to work in the office primarily, that were one office location, for example, companies. They did not have this infrastructure in place. So they had bigger problems adjusting to the new reality.
Well, everyone who went through and adjusted to the new reality has their own anecdotal experience. Some of us like working from remote, maybe some of us don't, and that certainly colors our perceptions of what's working or what isn't. Is there a way we can get past the anecdotes? How can we get some actual data on this?
So I have spent 1.5 years looking for data about this. And we have gathered, apart from the paper that we are discussing, Kyle, with you now, from one company, we have also gathered data from multiple surveys in different companies in both Sweden and Norway, saying how people feel about their productivity working from home. And basically, the stories that we get, they kind of repeat the anecdotes. So there is a camp of people who like it, and there is a camp of people who dislike it. And when we look at the data, we basically see that work from home is not for everybody, and there will be people who will be productive, and there will be people who will be unproductive. But the good news is that the majority of people feels either productive or same productivity as before, like in the office, or a little bit more productive.
Well, it's definitely important that employees are able to cope with this and to find a new routine and be productive under these circumstances. Are you seeing any broad trends? Maybe it's, the particular role they play, or it's an age thing. Who prefers work from home and who doesn't? Are there any consistencies?
Here, I think I will be speaking about a little bit from the evidence, but with a little bit of anecdotes as well. What we see in general is that younger employees want to work in the office. These are people whose social life happens in the office. They want to learn from more senior developers, more senior colleagues. They want to talk to others. They want to be able to ask questions over the shoulder and ask for advice, ask where to go, whom to talk to when you have a problem. So those people, younger people generally, would like to work in the office. And ironically, people who they want to talk to, these more senior people, they want to be working from home. So these are usually family people, or even people where young kids are out of the house, who feel comfortable, who have space to be uninterruptedly working from home, and also who enjoy being in the flow. So one of the key benefits, so to speak, from working from home is that people enter this uninterrupted flow where they can work in concentration and feel productive. So I think that's the main driver of this work from home.
Well, we know different companies have different cultures. Maybe they prefer one formalism or another, but at the end of the day, they have to look at a hardline measurement of productivity and decide, is it better, the same, or worse to be evolving their workforce? Are there metrics we can look at for software engineers to measure productivity?
That's a tricky question, I must say. There are no good measures of productivity. What we have done in our research is that we have looked at overall code production, so how much code engineers commit to the code base. And what we generally see that on average, when you average everything, then the production didn't really change with the pandemic for the software companies. But if you zoom into the individual stories, individual productivity, there you can see the differences that we have just discussed, that some engineers produce more, some engineers produce less. But having said that, code production is not the only thing that we want to encourage, right? So one thing to be concerned about is the work hours you put to maintain this code production. And what we have seen is that engineers during the pandemic tended to work a little bit longer hours from home. They don't commute, they don't go to work. So they log into the system and start making their code contributions roughly 30 minutes earlier and stay 30 minutes later on average. But of course, there are individuals who would come to work 1 or 1.5 hours earlier and stay 1.5, 2 hours later.
And there's also the commute that's now gone away. I guess each individual has to take their own choice in how you perceive that, but maybe someone could say we split the difference. I used to come in earlier, now I'll start work a little earlier, but my overall time is a little better. Do you get any of those insights or how people are feeling about this transition? Or is it overall a happy thing, or what are some of the common themes?
Yes, so it's like on average, we can say for many different measures that on average nothing really happens. But let's take one thing, loneliness and a feeling of isolation. We have talked to people who are young, also primarily expats who don't have families around them, who furthermore live alone in their small apartments. So they really felt isolated and they really felt their well-being wasn't very in check. And at the same time, you would see family people who actually spend more time with their children and spouses who say their well-being working from home has been great, better than on average before. So we still see a lot of these love and hate kind of differences in whatever measure we take. And Kyle, I would like to also add, you asked me about these productivity measures. What we have suggested in our work is to not only look into production and productivity in terms of like code produced per hour, but say, okay, if an engineer is happy, then he or she would actually produce more. If they are motivated or they collaborate well in the team, on a team level, they would produce more. So their productivity will increase. So we have actually looked into different aspects of productivity and whatever contributes to overall productivity of engineers.
Are there any surprising things people wouldn't consider that are important to that calculation?
Absolutely. I think that happiness in general is one of those things. And then there are a lot of trade-offs. For example, when you ask an engineer when they feel productive, and companies as well, they will focus on the outputs. So the most common is code, but then there are also people who would say that it's important to figure out how good the code is, so the quality of the code, fewer bugs, for example, introduced bugs and so on. But people would rarely think that meetings is something that drives productivity. But when we look into the collaboration, we want effective and efficient meetings to drive brainstorming sessions, to drive problem-solving sessions. So we have spent time digging into understanding the meeting culture in the company as one way to look at the well-performing teamwork, for example.
Well, meetings are something that my experience has been it's harder to have meetings. They were much easier to organize in an office environment. What does the data that you have access to show in this regard?
Definitely organizing meetings is different, very different. And we generally see that people are tired of online meetings. I mean, our data, we had access to quite a rich data set. We have actually looked into the calendar invitations. We looked at the accepted invitations. And let me not talk about the quality of that data. We all have our own habits of accepting and not coming to meetings, or not accepting and coming to meetings. But in general, because we have been comparing the habits of the same people, we see that this is a valid comparison. So what we did is we looked into the number of meetings, we looked into the minutes spent in meetings and duration of each meeting. And what we see is that there are more scheduled meetings than before. So whatever spontaneous discussions that we had before by the water coolers and coffee machines, they have become scheduled meetings. Also, we see that the meeting duration has become a little bit shorter. So if we had 60-minute meeting, it became 45. If we had 30-minute meeting, it became 25-minute meeting. So people try to introduce a little bit of breaks between the meetings, so ending them a little bit shorter. What we also see is that the longer meetings, like 4-hour meetings, are gone from the agendas. So it's all those, workshops that we have been organizing, they have become much shorter, and people prefer to take several of them than having like whole day booked for an online event. And the company we worked with in this research also introduced meeting-free days. So they have tried with Fridays and with Wednesdays, and different people settled for different days. But in general, they try to have one day free of meetings to get some work done and also to rest from online fatigue.
Thanks to our sponsor, mParticle. At the end of the day, your customer has to be at the center of everything you do. This starts with the right customer data strategy, as well as the right foundation to solve the challenges that typically inhibit success, such as data quality, data governance, and connectivity. mParticle is your real-time customer data infrastructure that helps you accelerate your data strategy by cleansing, visualizing, and integrating your customers' data from anywhere to anywhere. Ultimately, better data leads to better decisions, better customer experiences, and better outcomes. See why the best brands choose mParticle. Visit mparticle.com to learn how teams at Postmates, NBC Universal, Spotify, and Airbnb all use mParticle's customer data infrastructure to accelerate their customer data strategies. That's mParticle. Better data, better decisions, better outcomes. Visit mparticle.com to learn more. Thanks to our sponsor, Arctic Wolf. 2021 was a landmark year in cybersecurity. The rapid, piecemeal changes businesses made on the fly to infrastructure, applications, and access controls during 2020's huge shift to remote work were now under scrutiny, while security teams were still busy defending against a litany of attacks and attack methods. As the size, scope, and sophistication of attacks continued to grow, many organizations spent the last year overwhelmed by perpetual change, wondering when, where, and how things will ever improve. In early 2022, Arctic Wolf conducted a survey of over 300 global IT security decision makers to understand their priorities and anticipated challenges for the years ahead. Our goal was to understand their security roadmap for 2022 and to get a first-hand perspective on their current objectives and potential obstacles looming on the horizon. Visit arcticwolf.com/skeptic to find out what they learned. That's arcticwolf.com/skeptic. Well, even though it was maybe a challenge to migrate to online meetings, all of these points that you mentioned to me sound like positives. Shorter meetings, no 4-hour meetings. My intuition says that these must be improvements for overall productivity. Is there a good rational basis to support that idea, or is it just what I'd like to be true?
I think staying positive in this respect is a good thing because these online meetings seems to be our future. So I think you are absolutely right saying that shorter meetings and meeting-free days and better quality of the meetings is definitely a good thing. I can say that in the past, the companies that have been distributed with people from the distance, I mean, Kyle, have you been in a meeting where you see 6 people or 10 people around the table and you're the only one from a distance?
Oh, absolutely.
So how does it feel?
Like I'm more of a bystander than a participant some of the times.
Yeah, I think that the online meeting where everyone is connected through the media is a good thing. And we actually have data supporting that in the future, whenever at least some participants are on a distance, there are companies considering everyone opens up a laptop and connecting to the meeting with their video camera on so that people have this level playing field feeling. And I think we have made a lot of different habits during the pandemic to make the online meetings better. But there are also bad things about online meetings. So what our data suggests is that brainstorming meetings, for example, start not with a whiteboard, blank, page, where people share their ideas from zero, but with something to discuss. To make meetings more efficient, people work hard preparing the agenda and also preparing some ideas as input for discussion, which means that we lock ourselves to discussing something pre-prepared ideas instead of having totally open brainstorming. So I think that is something that worries me personally.
Could it be that those are things we simply need to learn new methods to do online and eventually we'll get there, or is there maybe some intrinsic value in physical proximity?
That's a tricky question. Now, I have my personal opinion, of course. I think we should learn to simulate all kinds of things that we have done in the past, and for the simple reason because people now have actually moved and they don't want to leave the company. And why should they? Because the future narrative is different from the past, and we must be able to accommodate everyone's needs and provide this equality of experience in the future as well. At the same time, I do believe that there is an intrinsic value in being in the office together with your colleagues. But we don't necessarily need to choose between the two, because what our companies, collaborating companies, are doing is that they say, okay, everyone can work from home in the future as well, except for important meetings, important events. Or some companies say, well, being fully remote is not an option, but having 4 days a week at home and 1 common day in the office is what we want.
In your study, you were able to look at the company that spanned 3 major countries, the US, the UK, and Sweden. Did you see any major differences across those groups?
Yes, there are definitely differences that we can see. For example, an interesting difference is that Swedish colleagues during the pandemic, they would actually say that they feel less connected to each other because they don't have these conversations in the office. Whereas American colleagues would say that they feel more connected to their peers because they see the glances of their personal lives they've never seen before. So I think that talks a little bit about the culture of the relationships between people. But in general, if we look into the different measures of productivity, different measures of meeting culture or communication, there are no difference that we see apparent differences in the data. In all countries, there are people who like working from home and people who don't like working from home.
Well, I know you may not have universal access, but you probably have a better sense of it than the average person. What are companies looking to do in the next few years? Will we see a continuation, a trend backwards, forwards, or what's the workplace going to look like?
That's a topic of our new study. So what we are doing now, we are talking to 14 different companies and with their site in globally distributed sites. And we gather work policies from different countries and different companies. And what we see in our data set is that half of the companies have allowed flexibility. So they welcome high degree of flexibility in the future. So they say after the pandemic, employees will be able to choose to work from home or from the office. Whereas the other half, or slightly less than half of the companies, somehow restrict this. So there are companies who say there are mandatory office days, and there are companies who say the proportion of time you spend at home and the proportion of time that you spend in the office is restricted. So for example, we have companies saying 3 days, no more than 3 days a week at home, no more than 2 days a week at home. There is one company in China who says people can work maximum 1 day a week from home. So that's an extreme case in our data set. There is also one company saying so employees can choose between fully remote or fully in the office and nothing in between. So we have very different strategies we have seen in these companies. And I think it's fair to say that companies are gambling a little bit at the moment and not really knowing what to do with their office space, what to do with the demands of the employees. So I think it's a time of experimentation.
And do you see any winning strategies? Are there commonalities of companies that are making this successful for both their productivity and their employee happiness?
I think it's too early to say, but what we already can say in terms of productivity, but in terms of happiness, I think the strategy of enforcing something, anything at the moment is not going to be very popular strategy. So there are people who consider quitting if they are introduced to a choice or a limited choice because the choices in other companies are open. So I think there will be a little bit of competition in the marketplace for the talents, best talents, and best talents will be able to perhaps have advantages also negotiating the degree of flexibility in the companies. But also from the cost perspective, there are companies who are reducing the office space or moving to new offices. And a lot of offices are being renovated with the idea of providing more collaboration spaces, more teamwork oriented practices and meeting facilities. So I think there will be companies that make themselves more attractive for newcomers, new job seekers, so to speak.
And given that we've now had arguably 2 years of longitudinal data or time for observation, are you seeing any trends? Are people accommodating and happy, or do we really still have a looming, mental health crisis coming or something along those lines?
I think what we saw after 1 year was a little bit of concern because our analysis of calendar data suggested that people are not taking vacations. So I think that's when we got a little bit scared because, the company we worked with is a very international company. They have very many people from different countries and they were reluctant to take vacation because they couldn't travel to their home countries. So that's why we saw no vacations. And that was a little bit of a concern. Now we see that people are taking vacations, even though they might not travel internationally that much as before. We are not concerned anymore. When it comes to different meeting data and code production data, it's quite stable. And it's not the non-changing line, a straight line. It fluctuates as normal as before, so there is nothing to be really concerned about. What we perhaps see new is that there are new employees entering companies that have never been in the office, they have never seen their colleagues live, face to face. And that's a little bit interesting because the company culture, we used to say that the culture is in the walls. And that's how you get to that culture is that you come to the office and you meet your colleagues and you see the interactions and behavior. And then you assimilate this behavior or you kind of say, no, I don't like this company, I go to work somewhere else. Now, this is going to change because we have been talking to people who have been onboarded in the company during the pandemic time, and they have no clue about the culture. So the latest evidence of this is we were talking about hackathons and what is the value of hackathons, how people feel about virtual hackathons. And it was such a clear difference between people who have been in the company for years. They would say, yeah, this is the most energetic place, the most inspiring time. And when you can make friends and so on and so forth, emphasizing the social aspect of hackathons. Whereas people who are new to the company, they focused very much on ideas, products coming out of hackathons, but not that much on friendships or new networking opportunities or social aspects. So I think the fun of virtual events that used to be collocated is gone. And that's something that I'm worried about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Darja, is there anywhere people can follow you and your work online?
Absolutely. We try to publish all our papers on arXiv, and we also have published one paper about the perceived productivity. It's already online in the Journal of Software and Systems, and there are more papers coming. So I have my own website, darjasmite.net, where I kind of maintain the list of papers we write that come out of our research. And we also write blog articles, me and my colleagues, and put them on LinkedIn. So anyone interested in the new research insights can follow us on LinkedIn.
We'll have some links in the show notes for people to follow up. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on Data Skeptic.
Great. Thank you for having me.
That concludes another installment of Data Skeptic Physically Distributed. Thanks to our sponsors today, mParticle and Arctic Wolf Networks. Myself, Claudia Armbruster, as Associate Producer, Vanessa Bly, Guest Coordinator, show notes written by David Abembe, and our host, Kyle Polich.